I'm here at the Capital Free, the Doctor Who Appreciation Society event today, and I'm really excited because I've been told I'm getting to interview a doctor, and I don't know which one yet, and I'm about to find out. Here we are, at a Doctor Who event, of course. You've done a few of these now. How do you enjoy coming along to these events and meeting the fans?
I love them. Every time I go back home, my wife said, whenever I go to a Doctor Who event, she always says, "You seem so happy." And I've been to America, you name it, Glasgow, Newcastle, all over Britain, and Doctor Who fans are like a big, happy family, and I do go home feeling happy about things. There's very few organisations you can join which makes you feel happy. I mean, cricket makes me feel happy, and going to Doctor Who events. I mean, people say, people ring me up and say, "Would you like to come and do it?" I always jump at it because it's like a great big family. I'm not just saying that because I'm here.
I've just been watching a panel. Everyone's gone and I've snuck in again, but I've been watching Michael with Colin Baker and Nicola Bryant doing a Trial of a Time Lord panel, and we'll drop little bits of that in throughout the interview, which I'm about to go and find Michael to record now. So obviously we're going to talk about you today as opposed to this Doctor Who nonsense. So we want to go back to the very early days, so I'm going to ask you about your childhood.
Yes.
What can you tell me about those days that you can remember?
Well, where do you want me to start? I mean, I was born in Nottingham 4 years before the war broke out. I remember the war breaking out and walking to my Catholic school when I was about 4 and a bit, and Nottingham had an air raid, and it was nuns at the Catholic school, and they thought it was God's blessing that the school had been bombed at night. All the windows were out. We didn't go to school. I was so pleased. We didn't go to school for about a week because it was being repaired. But the nuns didn't talk about all the other people who'd actually died during the bombing. So I thought that was a bit odd. Even though I was 4.5, I thought we'd been saved, but other people had gone. No, I mean, my father died. I never knew my father. He died when I was about a year old in an awful accident when he was playing rugby, when he got flu or something, and he got kicked in the chest, and he died of pneumonia. It was one of those things, I suppose. So I never knew him, and I was brought up by my mother, and later on from grandparents. I remember telling this story to Robert Powell, of Jesus Christ fame. And he started laughing because nearly everybody I was talking about, and then my mother died when I was 15, and then somebody else died, and he said, "There's so many deaths in your family." But it's the way it goes.
No more than in anybody else's, really. It's just no. They all happened quite early.
I never felt deprived. I don't know why. I think it was my mother. My mother was so marvellous about everything, and she got me onto reading poetry, and she was reading Dickens to me at a very, very early age, although I didn't understand much of it. But I realised why I didn't feel deprived when my mother died when I was nearly 15, because my grandfather, who I liked, here we go again, another death I liked a lot, died about 6 months before. And it took me years to realise that what was missing was love and affection. My grandfather was a very affectionate person, and my mother gave me love, whereas my grandmother they were obviously looking after me, and my uncle, there was no love there. But I had it until I was 15, so I think it sufficed.
So schooling-wise then, if that was family life, going to school during the war, when it hadn't been bombed. What kind of interest did you have at school? Was it sports, acting? What came into play then?
No, my first essay into acting, I played when I was being looked after by the nuns, I played Joseph, which is quite a good part, really. Sort of father of Jesus, but let's not go into that, because I think there would have been problems if she'd said, oh, by the way, I'm pregnant, the angel Gabriel. Oh, yes. And then never mind. That's beside the point. I played Joseph, and I was quite pleased about that. And but it was cricket really before acting. Although I acted quite a lot at school in a couple of comedies. I wanted to be a comedian. When I was 12. I wanted to be a comedian in the evenings and an actor in the evenings. I wanted to be a cricketer in the summer and a footballer in the winter and a writer in my spare time. So I was pretty big-headed about things, but...
But were you good at all of them?
I must, yes. It was the only thing at school I was good at was English, really. I was always top of the class in English, generally.
It's not that big-headed if you're good at them, then.
No, it isn't. But I wasn't bad at history either. I was very good at essay writing. And I wasn't a bad cricketer. I captained the school. I captained the school at football as well. And well, I meant when I left the nunnery when I was, was I 11 or something, and then went to the other Catholic school, the Becket School, which was all boys. I had a very fine education at the Becket School, Catholic, although I've still got Catholic guilt, and I'm not an atheist now, but I'm puzzled, absolutely puzzled, because I've got a lot of Jewish friends, Muslim friends, Church of England friends.
Gregarious.
Yes.
Okay. So when did the sport start to fade away and the acting take over then? What stage in your life was that happening?
Well, I did national service for nearly 2 years and acted there in 2 plays as well. And then the Nottingham Repertory Company at that time had a fantastic company. I mean, people like Brian Blessed, for instance, were walking on. It was that good. He played small parts. Michael Williams, who was married to Judi Dench, was there, and it was such a fantastic company. I didn't think I stood a chance, and I had joined a amateur group which was basically very left-wing. Well, I was left in those days. I don't mean over the top left. For instance, after rehearsal, we used to sing the Red Flag and Guide Me, O Thou Great Redeemer, for some unknown reason, probably because it was a good tune. And then came the Hungarian Revolution of 1956, and nobody said a word. And the 2 members of the there were 2 members of the Communist Party in our group. They packed up, and we never sang the Red Flag again, because we realised that Russia, and the left still tries to make apologies about it, but what happened there was just a destroying of the Hungarians. So this amateur group of mine started then collecting money for the Hungarian refugees, who all came over here. A lot of them came over here.
So at the Nottingham Cooperative Arts Centre, what kind of shows were you doing there?
We did George Bernard Shaw. We didn't do much Shakespeare. We did a hell of a lot of stuff. We did something that came out of the Hungarian Revolution in 1956, which Peggy Ashcroft had done. We were allowed to do it as an amateur company, which was against the regime out in Hungary. But we did so much comedy as well, and it was marvellous. I mean, as I said, we were quite left-wing at that time, but and all of them could have been professionals. There was one time which made me glad I was acting there, although that was before I had any serious ideas of going to drama school. And it quite touched me because we were doing a show, a pantomime for some children with disabilities. Some of them had, you know, brain problems and other things, and but they were very enjoyable, quite noisy, and I was playing a character called Mr. Gosh, and that's all I said one word, which was gosh, excited, gosh, unhappy, gosh. And I said this word about probably 50 times, depending on various different moods I was in, God. And I always got a laugh on a lot of them because they thought I was going to say something else. I opened my mouth and go, gosh. And I had to go into the audience and give balloons or something to the kids. And there was one child put their arms around my legs and said, I love you, Mr. Gosh. And I thought, that's why I actually want to be an actor. I thought if you can make somebody so happy, that's why I really wanted to be a comedian for quite a long time. And that's one of my regrets, that I've played a lot of comedy, especially on television, and a lot of comedy on stage. But I've never been in what you'd call apart from Bit of a Do, I was never in what you'd call a comic series. I got The Power Game, which was quite serious. And I think comedy is the best art. I mean, anybody up to a point, if they're good enough, can play Hamlet, and people can go to sleep while they're doing it. And there's no laugh. Well, there are some laughs in Hamlet, but if you don't get your laughs as a comedian, you know you shouldn't be there.
It's comedy and kids as well. Like, that is an audience that if they don't laugh, they're honest about it. And kids also, if they're bored, they let you know straight away. As well. Yeah.
And I then took grade 8, just acting, and managed to get a very high mark. And the guy who took me said, why don't you audition for Guildhall? Because I'd told him that the amateur group, I said, if it's that standard, the Nottingham group is that good, I don't stand a chance. He said, no, there's other groups going around. He said, audition for Guildhall. So I did, and I got a scholarship, which was damned lucky.
Having been in the arts group and your co-op thing, what did formal training actually add to what you had already?
The formal training didn't add all that much, because this amateur group consisted, before me, of John Bird, with Rory Bremner.
Yep.
Peter Bowles was just before me, who got the gold medal at RADA. Tom Baker after me, and Sue Pollard. Ken Loach was there at the same time as I was, and he wasn't very left in those days, and he was a damn good actor. So I think all the people of that group could have been professional actors, I'm sure of it. They were generally, most of them were teachers. But the formal training, I had to get rid of a sort of Nottingham Midlands accent, I suppose.
That tends to be the common drama school thing of...
Yes, but then I would get out of drama school and you find out people like Albert Finney and O'Toole, who, well, he's Irish, but he had a Leeds accent, and various other people were playing their own accents. I mean, Finney in Saturday Night, Sunday Morning, I thought, hang on, why did I lose my accent? I mean, you can probably tell it a bit now. If I'm a bit tired, it does come back sometimes. And then sometimes if I leave a message and listen to the message when I get back, I sound so common because I've forgotten it's there sometimes. Obviously, when I'm doing, you've got to do received pronunciation, it doesn't come into that. But even in talking books, occasionally I can tell it. Very occasionally, right towards the end of a bad day, you think, oh, here it goes. But I mean, a real Midlands accent, you wouldn't understand what I was talking about. I mean, for instance, what are we sen means, was he with you, was he with yo, or was he by himself? But the accents are going now. It's a shame. I like accents.
I've kept mine.
I like a lot of accents, as long as you're understandable. There was a Scots programme on with a marvellous Scots actor who was in, I've forgotten his name, Carlisle, about Glasgow. And I thought, hang on, I've been to Glasgow loads of times, and you needed subtitles. because Glaswegian, you know, it's very, and I can understand it because I spent a lot of time in Glasgow. But you should have, they should really have made it better because it's got to be understood. And it was a brilliant piece. I've forgotten the name of it now. It was a few years ago, and Carlisle's a great actor.
Once you'd lost that accent then at Guildhall, what were the first jobs that came along once you'd left?
The first job I got was when I was still at, they've got it wrong on Wikipedia, when I was still at drama school in the holidays of 1961. I went to Bangor in Northern Ireland, where I found out that a great actor called Colin Baker, who did loads of films and died too young, was there, and so was Jimmy Ellis of Z-Cars. He was there, and we also toured. We went all around Northern Ireland and played comedies and various other things within a week's rehearsal, week doing it, week's rehearsal, week doing it, which is great training, but unfortunately few actors can do that nowadays. But that was my first thing in while I was still at drama school.
So did you have to get special permission to do that if you were supposed to be at the school?
Well, it was during the holidays.
Oh, right, so yeah.
But they allowed me another 2 days, 2 weeks on top, and by that time I'd been offered an Ibsen called Enemy of the People, which I had to learn, and it was quite tricky doing that because I'd had 2 weeks off when we should have been rehearsing it. Yeah.
And I think the first big TV was The Power Game. Was that the first big telly?
Yes, I was at the Royal Shakespeare Company at that time, and I was forced to take a holiday. And I said, I don't want to go on a holiday in December. I haven't got any money. There's nowhere to go. He said, no, that's it. You've got to have a holiday. So I had a fortnight off, and within that holiday, I did a show written by a guy called Wilfrid Greatorex, who wrote a lot of the Power Game stuff. And, I don't know, there's a lot of luck in life, and I was very lucky to have done that. If they hadn't forced me to take a holiday, I wouldn't have done that show, which came out and was directed by somebody who then directed some of the Power Game. So who knows? If they hadn't forced me to take the holiday, I wouldn't have got that particular part and might not have done the Power Game. And I was doing the Power Game while I was at the RSC, because we were in repertory in the RSC, and they allowed me off. And I thought it was so easy because I'd done, 3.5, nearly 4-hour Hamlet with David Warner. And in those days, we used to rehearse we used to have about a fortnight's rehearsal. I didn't have as much rehearsal because I was at the RSC in the evenings and had to get back early. But I couldn't believe it. I thought, this is easy. This is easy peasy after doing 4.5-hour Hamlet.
Around that time, you did a show that would be of a special interest to a Doctor Who audience like this, of UFO, out horse riding with Susan Jameson.
That's right.
What do you remember about doing that?
Well, the peculiar thing was I did some interviews recently because they did a whole book on the UFO. Now, all right, I do remember it because I've met Susan many times since, because she's married to a friend of mine called, she's married to Jimmy Bolam. And I remember her, expert horsewoman. I could ride a horse, but...
You certainly convinced me watching it.
She had to... The horse was supposed to go that way, and it didn't. It went the other way, and she fell off and bruised herself very badly, and I admired her for that, but she still got back up. It's like, every car crash, you get back on the horse, and I remembered that. But to be interviewed, 40 years after the event, more, and to talk about it, but I did remember Richard Vernon was in it, there again, a lovely comedian. Well, not just a comedian, he was a very fine actor. And I got to know Ed Bishop on that. There again, very good actor. Didn't do all that much outside that, though, unfortunately, and he was a fine actor.
him and Shane Rimmer tended to be the stock Americans in TV shows around that time. There's an American part, we'll get either Ed or Shane in to play that. They did an awful lot
although
of that.
Ed was actually Canadian, wasn't he?
So was Shane. Oh, so is
Of course
Shane.
he was. Yeah. Michael Billings was in that as well, wasn't he? No, Michael Billington.
That's right.
Yeah, who was at the RSC for a time, but unfortunately he died. He died a few years ago, too young.
And did you get any dealings with Gerry Anderson himself?
Oh, yes. Well, I was interviewed, this was over a year ago, by Gerry's son.
Jamie.
Jamie,
Yeah.
that's right, because I said he hadn't introduced himself properly. And I said, "Are you Gerry's son?" And he said, "Yes." And it was lovely seeing him again, because Anderson was a fine filmmaker. One or two people knocked UFO because they said it wasn't this and it wasn't that, but it had a very good audience. I had a very good audience, viewers, and Gerry was a great filmmaker. There aren't all that many of them nowadays in television. Shouldn't say that.
But you have. Tailor Soldier Spy was obviously a huge show at the time, and you got Alec Guinness was the lead. Did you ever sort of find yourself on that or on other things actually going, "Okay, I'm working with an acting hero here, someone that you really respected"?
Yes, and it was rather strange about that, because I'd met Alec when he was doing Cromwell with Richard Harris, and I'd cavorted a bit with Richard Harris, and I don't think Alec never said anything, but I don't think he approved of Richard Harris's behaviour, because Richard Harris could, he played football in the hotel reception, and then pay for the damage, that kind of thing, and have too much to drink. I didn't drink as much as he did, but he wasn't he wasn't a proper drinker. I saw him drink a bottle of brandy by the neck, and he couldn't understand why he was taken to hospital. He had to be pumped out. That was after having a meal with beer, wine, liqueurs, and then drinks a bottle of brandy. But when I came to do Tinker Tailor, Alec just mentioned the fact that, oh yes, of course we met a few times working with that Irishman. I said yes. But I found out that Alec had put me and 4 or 5 other actors up for Tinker Tailor. He would never admit it. I heard this on the grapevine. He'd put our names up because he wanted to work with them. I was very touched and moved by the fact that he'd chosen me and 4 other people, because that's who he wanted in it with him. And it was... When you're working with somebody like that, you can't be too much in awe of them, otherwise you wouldn't be able to get a word out. But he was absolutely charming and incredibly generous, same as Olivier. Incredible generosity, not just buying meals and it was generosity of spirit as well. He said to me once, true generosity, Michael, isn't giving somebody money, it's time. It's when a friend of yours is in hospital and you go and see him, and you have time to see him, not just doling out the money. Anybody can do that if they're rich enough. But he used to, do you know, there was a strike on. It was after an evening where he'd taken the whole crew out and the cast out for a meal, and he paid for the lot. And he got quite upset because John Irving, the director, and Howell Bennett and somebody else had started quoting the Scottish play, which you don't really do, well, you shouldn't. Next day, Alec Guinness gets a problem with his eye, retinal problems. Howell Bennett had to go to hospital, and there's a strike on. The BBC struck. Good news was that we were stuck in this hotel. I was stuck in this hotel with Alec Guinness and Anthony Bate and Howell Bennett, although he was in hospital for some time. We had to be on call till 12 o'clock. 12 o'clock, we were broken for the rest of the day. Do you fancy some Veuve Clicquot, Michael? So, a couple of Veuve Clicquot. That was for a whole week. We had some Veuve Clicquot and then meal in the evenings. No, I wished the strike was going to go on for another month or so, but it got slightly desperate. Irving got upset that it might not be done. And we were in the middle of shooting. We got an amazing cast, but the BBC then, and so we were back working again. And I said to Alec, I said, about a week later, when we were back at work, I said, I do miss those Veuve Clicquots. He said, don't tell anybody.
And now you have.
I have.
So was TV what you wanted to get into then, if it was?
No, I didn't. No, not really. I wanted to just do good work. I mean, most actors in those days, and I think now that you don't go into the business to make a lot of money. I want good parts, and it was theatre, and then the Power Game came along, and then one or two other things, and after I'd done the Nicholas Alexandra, I went back into the theatre because I wasn't being offered anything in films. I don't know what went wrong. I didn't get on very well with the producer of Nicholas Alexandra, Sam Spiegel, who won, 3, 4 Oscars? But I've just done an interview about him. Nobody could stand him. Bogart couldn't stand him. Lauren Bacall couldn't stand him. Oh, there were so many people. Hated the man. But he chose sometimes the right people. But
so did he cast you?
Things. Yes, he did. Ian Holm was up for it. Roy Dotrice was up for it. I go to the first audition with Liv Ullmann, who was married to Ingmar Bergman, the great Swedish film director, and I was sort of in awe of her up to a point. She was charming, did it. Next time, it was Janet Sussman who was there, and I found out that Sam Spiegel didn't like Liv Ullmann's accent. Stupid man. Alexandra was German. Yeah. She could have easily had an accent. He turned down Max von Sydow, who was one of the great, because he had an accent. I've talked about this before somewhere. Rasputin was a peasant, so he could easily have had an accent. That was Sam Spiegel's thinking. He then offered it to Peter O'Toole, and I was in Peter's office. I was in Sam's office when the rejection came through, because he'd got the first. If you don't have a completed script and you're on contract, you can say, I'm sorry, the script's not good enough. Wait for a completed script. He got the completed script eventually and sent a letter to Sam Spiegel saying, love the completed script, but my contract finished 2 weeks ago. So,
goodbye.
Up yours and goodbye. And Spiegel went berserk. It was then offered to Tom Baker, who I'd only met a couple of times before, and it was suggested I was sounds as if I was there in history all the time, but I wasn't. I just happened to be in the makeup place in Madrid where Olivier said, I know who could play that part. We've got a chap at the National at the moment, and he played a berserk lift attendant in a television. He'd be the one, and so he suggested Tom for it. I mean, O'Toole was going to get paid a fortune, but Tom did it for peanuts. And but Nicholas didn't do anybody any good, really. I mean, Tom didn't get Doctor Who until about 3 or 4 years afterwards, I don't think.
Yeah, and it was the Sinbad movie that the producer went to see. They went to see Tom in Sinbad and went, yes, I can see
That's
him
right,
for the
Sinbad,
part. Yeah. So, yeah.
Directed by a Spaniard or an Italian or something. Yeah.
So that was when you met Tom Baker then, and you've stayed friends ever since?
Yes. Yeah. I haven't seen him all that much lately. I mean, you know what Tom's like. I don't think he's terribly well at the moment. I hope he's okay. But I saw him about a year ago, and I sent him a birthday card. He sent me a lovely little note saying, when I think of old times, they shine in my memory. Because we were like brothers on that. He said that in his book. We got on so well together. And of course he was going between the National and then doing Rasputin in Spain. I don't know how he did it.
But I was thinking, that doesn't sound a very Tom Baker message, though, that little note he sent you there.
No, it slightly upset me, because Tom doesn't normally. He normally winds you up and is a bit naughty.
There was a serious moment for him for the change. So, obviously, the other Baker, Colin Baker, was your doctor in Doctor Who. I was watching you, the two of you on stage today, sparring away, as doctors do.
I was listening to him as I drove here last night, reading a book. What's it called?
Rogue Mail.
Rogue Mail. Brilliant. May I recommend to you, for good radio listening, Radio 4 Extra. There's so much old stuff on the... sorry.
You're the president, you can do what you like.
There's so much old stuff on there that's brilliant. You say you recorded that about 10 years ago?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's bloody brilliant. You ought to do more acting, you know.
I'll give you the money later.
How did you get the part in Doctor Who?
Well, you know, nowadays, even if you do okay, you've got to go and see people. In those days, I just got offered it. And I'd liked Doctor Who, and I thought, right, I'd read the script. I read the first couple of scripts and did it. And I thought, this is very good. The first two scripts weren't bad that I had, but the dialogue wasn't amazing in the Trial of a Time Lord. But I wanted to do it because it had become like Coronation Street and EastEnders, it had become an institution.
Oh, absolutely. If it was one long story with 3 different sets of writers writing bits of it, did it feel like a cohesive script, or did it feel like, oh, you can tell where the writers are changing?
It felt cohesive as long as I was concerned, as the character I was playing, and I didn't have many problems. I had some quite good lines. I felt more sorry for the Colin character. He had some very ropey dialogue. I mean, I know a lot of people thought it was very funny, him calling me the barnyard or the scrapyard instead of the valeyard, but it wasn't. He didn't have an amazing amount of good dialogue to work with. Whereas mine, me and Lynda Bellingham were stuck apart. I managed to get out twice in the Potteries with Jeff Hughes, and then later on in Canberra Sands. But it didn't. The dialogue didn't worry me all that much, and it's got even better with the Big Finish productions, of course.
Because you and Colin and Lynda were in the trial room for almost the whole duration, and then it would cut away to the evidence and the story with Joan Sims and Brian Blessed, or those bits. Did you ever think that you were in the boring bits? That, oh, the action was happening on the screen and then it would cut back to you to have an argument again?
In some ways, but if you'd have played all those scenes together, it would have been quite boring, because it was all on the same level, and it gets me annoyed now when I see things on television and I think the director doesn't know anything about pace. You see some things and everything's the same pace, nothing slows down. Whereas with us, it didn't matter with us, because you'd got interspersed story and then it was back to us. But if you'd played all of ours in one long thing together, it would have been, but it was helped by having different tempi and pauses in the other scenes that were, you know, that we were describing or having a go at.
And in a way, it ends up that you and Lynda did the entire run of that story, but actually Nicola leaves during it and Bonnie comes in during it. So you and Lynda were actually in it longer than the other regulars were that year, other than Colin.
Yes, we were. We were in it longer than Nicola for that time, and Bonnie.
So was it a relief then to get out on location and go to Canberra Sands and the Pottery?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, especially in the Potteries. Well, and Canberra Sands, especially in the Potteries, because I remember I forgot, how was it, about 30 years ago, I think. My daughter was about 4 then, 3 or 4, and she loved that laugh I had to do around the Potteries, and I liked it as well. She used to say, again, again, again. Oh, I loved it. Jeff Hughes was such a fantastic chap to work with. I liked him a lot.
It's a lovely performance as well from Jeff.
Yeah, it is.
Can you remember at what stage you were told, oh, and the Valeyard is the Doctor? Were you told that quite early, or did you just find it out in the scripts?
Well, it was there in the Valeyard being the Doctor was there in the writing, because I knew I was the evil side of the Colin Baker Doctor. So I don't think anybody gets upset about it, but the amount of all the Doctor Who fans know I am one of the Doctors. Absolutely. And I keep saying I'm not desperate for a job, but I just wish the people at the top would accept the fact that I am one of the Doctors. I've said this time and time again, they should never have written it in, because it's given themselves a very ridiculous situation. Because what was John Hurt playing, for instance, in one of the Doctor Who's?
He was playing the Doctor because
I know
Christopher Eccleston wouldn't do it. So they have to find a means of achieving that.
But we've done a lot of big Finnish productions where I've reprised the part of the Valeyard, and he's definitely one of the Doctors. In fact, I sometimes get signing things where they get every single Doctor and then me with a question mark.
And it is a very bold statement to make of, and this is the evil Doctor, because the Masters like Holmes and Moriarty, the Doctor and the Master, but this is saying evil Holmes, really.
Yeah.
So there's not.
Although I've done now I've done about 4 of the Valeyard in the big Finnish productions, which are generally very good scripts. Well, no, generally, but they're all good scripts. Good stuff to do.
And you get to kill Colin Baker's Doctor off in one. You are responsible for him becoming Sylvester McCoy.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Colin will never speak to you again. And you read the talking book version of The Ultimate Foe novel.
I did, yes.
Pip and Jane Baker's prose on audio.
Yeah, the prose wasn't fantastic, but I had to look at some of the episodes because of how the other characters were playing their parts, like, what's her name, Shalom Glitz, was it? Yeah.
Sabalom Glitz, yes.
Sabalom Glitz. I had to find out what he was doing with it, because I had to do all the voices in it, and I like doing that, and it didn't take me all that long actually to do it, because I know about Doctor Who now of that period, you know.
Now that period was when the script editor Eric Sayward and the producer John Nathan Turner, their professional relationship was totally breaking down. Whilst Trial was being made, they were falling out as well.
Yeah, they
so
were.
Were you particularly picking up on problems with the BBC, problems with each other, or in the studio were you sort of kept away from all that?
I knew it was going on, but I couldn't do anything about it, because I'd like to have done, but I thought if I say anything, it's going to make it even worse. And Lynda wanted to say something, but Lynda and I used to have chats and say, well, it's pointless, it'll just make it worse. And we don't know enough about the situation to be able to take on the big boys, the suits, as it were. But we knew a lot of things were going on. I felt sorry for Colin, although Colin said it didn't affect him as much as it should have done, because he was getting on with doing his job at the time.
Was there the feeling that Doctor Who was coming to an end when you were doing it?
No.
Was there any inkling that all this was Machiavellian
well, there might have been
things
for you,
going on?
I'm a sunny little disposition. I just assume everything's lovely, unless someone comes and stands in front of me and shouts, "Things are not lovely." It didn't occur to Doctor Who couldn't come to an end. I couldn't be the one who
you weren't,
brought it to its conclusion.
Wasn't you?
But no, to be fair, there were little glimmers behind the scenes, all was not entirely well between the producer and the script editor, for instance. And I was aware of that, because the script editor kept banging on about it. But no, the idea that a programme like Doctor Who could ever be other than on television never occurred to me. Did it to you?
No.
But eventually the casualty of that was that Colin lost his job.
I know.
Because they felt they had to do something, and that seemed the most visible thing to do. But So that must have been a shock when you found out that Colin wasn't getting another year as the Doctor.
Yes, I didn't realise what had happened until quite a few months later. I thought it was appalling behaviour. I mean, if I've met Grade quite a few times on a charity level, and all right, I get on all right with him because he's never done me any harm. And I just felt sorry for Colin being in that situation and getting the sack like that. Colin doesn't agree with me on this, but I think Doctor Who could have finished at that time. Well, it did finish for quite some months, didn't it? It was elbowed.
Well, your story was it coming back after having a delay between seasons that had been, rather than coming back every year, there was an 18-month gap.
That's right.
And then it was your one, and then they'd cut the length of the series in half as well, so there were fewer episodes.
Yeah.
So.
But a lot of people who like Doctor Who, bless them, there were a lot of petitions and various things going on, and people telling Grade that he'd got it wrong. I mean, what I was going to say. From Grade's point of view, all right, he didn't like Doctor Who. I don't particularly like Agatha Christie. But if I was in charge of a theatre company, I'd put Agatha Christie on to get the bums on seats, even though I don't like her. I think she's brilliant at plots. I've done a lot of her stories for books, but she has got no idea of characterisation. She'll say things like, oh, he had a mid-European accent. Well, what does that mean? Could be Polish, could be Hungarian, could be... And the people who've made her are people like David Suchet and all those people who played Miss Marple, all those marvellous actresses. They've made her because, in fact, to me, there's no proper substance about Agatha Christie. Brilliant at plots and storylines, but characterisation, forget it. That's one of my prejudices, I'm sorry.
Now, Eric Saward had written the original final episode of Tailor Soldier, but that never made it to the screen. They got Pip and Jem to do another one. Did you ever see the original episode?
No, I wanted to, and I think Lynda might have had a copy, and I said, can I have a look at it? And she said, oh, I've been told not to talk about it, and then she couldn't find it.
Well, I read it last week. It's just out of curiosity and preparation for this.
Did you?
I did, yes. And it's very obvious that the work of a man who's had his confidence knocked by what's going on at the BBC. You can tell that it's not written by the same man who wrote some cracking Doctor Who stories a few years earlier. You can tell that he's...
Yeah, I'm sure you can.
But it never made its way to you. And it ended on a massive cliffhanger of the two of you fighting in the Matrix and them saying, oh, neither of them will ever escape. And John Nathan Turner was convinced that will be the excuse Grade needs to axe the show. If we leave it on a big cliffhanger, we won't be coming back. So that's why they did another.
Oh, dear.
Yeah. Has Colin also become like a mate that you've kept seeing at these events?
Yes, he has. Yeah, I've known Colin now we exchange Christmas cards, and if you can remember my address, I get them back from him. Well, no. Yeah. But I don't see him as much as I used to see Tom. Yeah, I mean, I'm got 30 years now.
Stephen Moffat. Now, you have worked for him playing a Doctor Who type character, Colonel X, in a Press Gang episode.
That's right.
What do you remember about doing that?
Oh, I loved it. I mean, Julia Sawalha and Dexter Fletcher. I shouldn't really... Yes, I can say this, I suppose. Well, they were quite young then, and I arrived that night and went to see... They were still acting before I worked next day. And it was an American director, I think. And I said, oh, God, I wish I'd got that kind of energy. And the director went... they were both sniffing the white powder. And but my character was lovely, Colonel X. It was a brilliant case. You could have made a whole series about that alone. I had some beautiful lines in it. Moffat, and I knew Moffat was going places. I think it was his first time as a scriptwriter, and I thought, you've got it, mate. And I don't often get it wrong. You can tell somebody's got it. And I wasn't surprised when, a few years later, he was doing splendidly.
No. Speaking of great writers, I have to ask you about A Bit of a Do, because it was written by David Nobbs, who is my favourite writer. I love his books, and it's one of my favourite TV shows, so I have to ask you what you remember about doing A Bit of a Do.
I was offered that, and I found out later that David, we were in Leeds, and I was staying in a place where a lot of actors and directors were staying, and she ran this boarding house, and we were all at breakfast, and David said to me, you know, I wanted you to play that part because you'd said to one of the waitresses, was the place licensed for dancing? It was just one of those silly things you say first thing in the morning. Is this place licensed for dancing? And she said, oh, I'll just go and find out from the manager. And she took it seriously, and then I had to say, I'm sorry, I'm joking. And he said, that's when I realised you'd got a sense of it. And there again, luck, whether I'd have got it or, in the normal set of stuff. But David had been there, and I hadn't met him at the time. I got on so well with him, passion for cricket. And there again, inferior writers sometimes won't let you change a line. And I'm not talking about the likes of Harold Pinter, marvellous stuff. But I remember once doing a speech, and we were rehearsing it, and I said to David, he said, I know what you're going to say about that speech. It's too long, isn't it? He said, yes. I said, yes. Can we cut it? He said, yes, I'm going to cut so-and-so. And I wanted to cut the first half, and he wanted to cut the second half, or whatever way round it was. And we came to a compromise, and it was so sweet of him because he realised that it was too long. And we took bits, and it was far better speech than it would have been, if you see what I mean. He was a good man.
And it's a fantastic conceit for the series of each episode takes place at a party, and then the next one takes place at the next party, and the viewers have to realise what events have taken place in between the two parties and catch up.
Well,
with
not always a party, because one was a funeral.
Yes, yes.
One was a funeral. But an amazing cast. I mean, Stephanie Cole and Tim Wilton, who I'm still friendly with. They could have had a series made on their own. And Nicola Paget and Gwen Taylor, such fantastic parts for women as well. Yeah, that's marvellous. I had to bring it up because it's genuinely one of my favourite TV shows, so I had to ask you about it. And David Jayston was the lead in it. Yeah.
And of course you then worked with David again, because you were responsible for Del Boy making his millions.
I was.
Yeah.
On Only Fools and Horses. It's strange, I did 8 days' work on that. How long ago was it? 30 years. 8 days' work. And, well, thank you very much. Every time it goes out on terrestrial, it's quite a lot of repeat money. It goes out on UK Gold a lot. That's about Forbes Halfpenny or something, but it goes out a lot on UK Gold. And there again, if you take my career, I did Doctor Who 31 years ago. Only Fools and Horses around about 30 years ago. Tinker Tailor 40 years ago. And I'm still involved with those 3 shows and nothing else. I'd never have, if you'd had a bet, would you take a bet? You're going to be in Doctor Who. It's going to be, you're going to go to the States and sign things for fans and things like that. I'd never have believed it.
Well, first of all, thank you all for being here. It's great to see you. Michael, I'm a bit odd in that I'm a Doctor Who fan and a soap fan. And I enjoyed your time very much on Emmerdale. Can you give us some memories of that?
I had a marvellous time on that. And in fact, I was on it for about a year or so. And I'd known Patrick Mower from way back. And our scenes were quite good. But there was a lot of, the producer got the sack right every sort of 3 or 4 months and was not the sack. They were elbowed sideways and they still had the power, which if it was an actor, he'd get the sack and he wouldn't be able, he'd have problems.
How different is working on a soap to working on a proper drama, if you like. I know I'm being cheeky there, but the schedule must be very different, how the filming wise.
Yes, I think the trouble with I know people who are working on shows at the moment, quite well-known people who can't stand what's going on because they're overworked and they are doing. I mean, for instance, in Emmerdale, I had a lot of scenes with my newly found daughter, but we used to see each other in the evening before the big shows and have a drink or a meal and go over the lines again and again and again. You get there to do the scene and it's just one rehearsal, camera rehearsal, and you're doing it. It's not a proper way of acting, I don't think. Whereas, as I told you in the old days with the power game, we had 2 weeks rehearsal. It's unheard of nowadays. You just go on and do it. And I don't know many actors who can do that. McGann.
Yeah,
now he's
McGann,
in
yeah.
something at the moment, isn't he?
He's doing Holby at the moment, yeah.
Yes. I don't think I better say too much about that because I don't think he's all that happy.
Right. Was Jenna Coleman in Emmerdale at the time you were in it?
She was Jenna Louise Coleman then. She dropped it. But there again, it was rather like with Moffat. I knew she was a talented actress, and I think it was one of her first jobs, actually. I only had a couple of scenes with her, but you can tell. I could tell she'd got it, whatever that it is. I liked her in... I didn't particularly like a lot of the dialogue in the Victoria, but she was very good in that character, playing the Queen. Excellent. She was about the right height.
What other Doctor Who stars have you worked with elsewhere?
I worked with Patrick Troughton on a radio years and years ago, because I remember saying to him, "Why are you doing this?" And he said, "Well, I need every penny I need every penny I can get," because of course, as you know, he'd got two families.
Somebody else who played the Doctor in Doctor Who for only one story was Richard Hurndall, who was in The Five Doctors taking on William Hartnell's part.
Yes.
And I believe you worked with Richard on something.
I did. He was in the Power Game for a very short time. He was in the Power Game, and there again, he was a bit like Richard Vernon. There used to be actors like that in the business who were gentlemen and spoke properly, couldn't do any accents, like a lot of my generation can, I think. But there was that gentleman actor, and Hurndall was an absolute... If you wanted to cast a gentleman, you cast Richard Hurndall or Richard Vernon. There were a lot of them round at that time. A sweet man. But that was only for one episode, I think it was. Power Game.
Speaking of voices, you have a very distinctive, very fine voice yourself, which has been noted in talking books and many things. But I have to say, I remember that from an advert I used to hear an awful lot at the time for a certain spreadable product, and I couldn't resist bringing it up.
That's very funny you should say that. Yes, that's right, because I did a hell of a lot of voiceovers and it wasn't doing my career any good at the time, particularly. But when I was at the National when I was doing some of those St Ivel Gold, and I was going gold from St Ivel. And eventually I said to this lady who was doing it with me, I said, "I'm sounding more and more like Olivier." She said, "Oh, it doesn't matter. A gold from St Ivel. Gold from..." And I was working with Olivier at the time, and I said, "I think I'm starting to sound like you." He said, "Don't worry about that. Take the money and run." He'd done a commercial for those cameras. What do you call them? Not Instagram. What were they called? Those cameras you can just take
Polaroids.
Polaroids.
Yeah.
In the States. The actual campaign was a total utter disaster, but the commercial won awards all over America. But they didn't sell any Polaroids. And he told me that. He said, it's like those Morecambe and Wise ads. You could remember that it was Morecambe and Wise, but you couldn't remember what they were selling. And
Leonard Rossiter and John Collins, apparently it was Cinzano they were advertising, but it was sales of Martini that shot up. Because
that's right, I always thought it was Campari.
It was, people just knew it was the adverts with Leonard Rossiter and
yes.
John Collins, they never did. So what have been your favourite jobs for you?
Oh, somebody asked me that only about half an hour ago. There's been so many. I enjoyed the power game because I loved working with Pat Wymark up to a point, although there again, another drinker ruined his career. I liked doing Eden End, directed by Olivier at the National, with Joan Plowright. I like playing Rochester in Jane Eyre with Soroka, because that was a hell of a long time ago. And it was released by, I think the Telegraph released it about 4 or 5 years ago. I started getting letters from 17 and 18-year-olds, and I send them what I look like now, and I put on the back, "This is what I look like now, isn't it a shame?" Because I didn't look too bad when I was playing Rochester. Bit of a do I adored, because it was like, if you're in a good show, it was like going, it wasn't like going to work at all. We were going to enjoy ourselves, as long as we didn't get too silly. We did the work with discipline, but we enjoyed ourselves, and it was amazing with Nobbs and that lot.
Yeah, as I say, it was one of my favourites, so I'm really pleased that it's one of yours as well. But when you are forming this team with the other actors, and particularly in the theatre, and you're playing a part for some period, how do you keep it fresh? Are you a bit of a practical joker, or do you take it all very seriously?
No, I don't think you can take it too seriously at all. I don't mean, but I found out whenever I've been doing a tragic part, you've got to let off steam. Whereas the comedies I've done, well, I did Private Lives with Mariah Aitken. There was no fooling around on that, because we realised that if we didn't get it right, like I said before, if you do nothing, you're in a comedy. Although there are other elements in that, but if you're doing a tragedy, you've got to let off steam occasionally, because it can get too much and you can't take work home with you. I'd make the exception with Daniel Day-Lewis. I mean, he's quite a remarkable animal. I don't know how he does it. If he's playing somebody who's locked up, he'll have himself locked up in prison for about... I couldn't do that, because I think you ought to be able to do it on technique, because he is an exception. The most Oscar-laden... Well, he's Irish, in fact, isn't he? Or is he American citizenship now? That probably ever existed. I will make an exception. I don't like bad method actors. You know, they mumble this, and you want to say... And it's not fair to your fellow actors if you're mumbling a part and you're just doing it for yourself. You've got to do it, it's got to be the playwright first, your fellow actors second, and never forget the fact that there's an audience there. Otherwise, you might as well not be bloody doing it. I mean, mumble, I'm being so real here. Yeah, real and boring, sometimes, I think. But I comedy, I'd love to have done far more comedy, especially on television. Although a bit of a do, that was a comic part. I based it on a solicitor I knew in Woking at the time.
Of course, because you were Neville Badger of Badger, Fox and Badger.
Yes. Although he never found out, and he's long gone now. But he was the kind of solicitor who'd turn up, and they'd say, "Where are they?" And he left it in the office. They used to have to adjourn. So I based it on that. And he was a very good solicitor on a certain level, as long as he didn't have too much documentation.
You've been working on your autobiography with Karen Louise Hollis.
I have.
How is that going? How have you been enjoying doing that?
I've got a story about Brenda Blethyn, and I had to ring up her agent because I got a number that was silly. Anyway, she sent me an email. She said, I don't know what you're going to put in the book. She said you could put anything, because those days when we were doing Outside Edge, sometimes we were all a bit naughty. Anyway, she said, I can use this story. I'm not going to tell it now, but you'd never think it of Brenda Blethyn. It wasn't illegal at all. It was just incredibly funny. Her and Josie Lawrence. Well, I'll tell you one story. Her and Josie Lawrence. There was a very he was full of himself. He only had about 7 or 8 lines in it, but he was around a lot as one of the cricketers, and he kept spitting, which Brenda and Josie didn't like. Anyway, one night when there were no journalists allowed in the pub, thank goodness, because there would have been some stories. They got a hold of this guy and got his trousers off and threw them out the window. They said, "You've got to behave yourself in future. None of this spitting on the set." And he had to go out in his underpants to get his trousers back from the main road. But Brenda said, I can use this other story, which is sweet of her.
I look forward to finding it out. But Karen was very helpful for me preparing for this, so I'm very pleased you're doing your autobiography because it helped me no end.
Well, it won't really be an autobiography. It'll be a biography with the help of Karen, Louise. Is she going to drop the Louise like Jenna Louise?
Jenna Coleman.
Yes. It's very strange with names nowadays, because if you had a double-barrelled or a triple-barrel name in the old days, you were terribly sort of posh. Nowadays, everybody's got... A lot of actresses, actors and actresses have got 2 names. And it's like, what's her name on Countdown? Only Connect. She's taken her husband's name. That's fair enough. But it's got more. In the old days, you had to be posh to have a double-barrel name or a triple-barrel name. That's beside the point, you see. Gone off at a tangent.
It's all the connect, everything connects up. So summing up then, Valeyard style for the defence or the prosecution, whatever, looking back on the life, are you happy with your lot?
I've met so many fantastic people, not just actors and directors, and I've played cricket with in pro-ams with some of my idols like Cowdrey, Jon Snow, Fred Truman, etc., etc., etc. And I met a lot of marvellous comedians. I met so many lovely people connected with this. I wish I'd done more comedy, and sometimes, I don't know, I lose jobs because nowadays the situation in the business is totally different with casting. I'm up against people like, or I was for you, Tom Courtenay now, who does television, Albert Finney, if he's well enough, and various people, and it's quite a thing to try and get onto. But I don't really regret anything, because I've been lucky, and I've met some fantastic people.
So the hope's just to keep going, then.
Yes,
just keep working.
Keep right on to the end of Harry Lauder. Keep right on to the end of the road. Keep right on to the end. Ha ha. Terrible Scots accent.
So's mine. Well, I find you guilty of bringing an awful lot of pleasure to Doctor Who fans and the viewing public everywhere. Michael Jayston, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.